Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Free TV. It is Tuesday, July 29th, 2026. Is it? Oh, it's the 28th. Sorry. Gotta wear the readers. It's the 28th, Tuesday. So glad to be back with you here on Your Free TV. We're going to jump in with my disclaimer. This video is for entertainment purposes only. It is protected by the United States Constitution, protecting free speech, as well as the Sullivan Act and reporting. It is not intended to bully or harass anyone, never to incite violence, hatred, or lawlessness of any kind. It doesn't give legal, medical, or financial advice, and there are further disclaimers in the description below. So glad to be back with you here on the channel. We're going to jump right into the news here after I thank my supporters. Thanks so much for supporting monthly. Everybody who does that is making this channel happen. I so appreciate it. And please subscribe. Please like and share. Likes are really important. Sharing's important. Can't stand all that stuff, but apparently got to do it. I saw that a while ago sort of broke out of the algorithm because of sharing of the video. And so that's really important, as Your Free TV is massively shadow banned. All right, thanks for that. So we're going to jump right in here to the news. Of course, we have the Lindsey Graham funeral today, goes on tomorrow in South Carolina, but at the National Cathedral, and then before that at the Rotunda at the Senate. Very, very interesting stuff we're going to get into there. Trump's speech was very interesting, and a lot of the speeches were kind of like smiling insults the whole way, which was also very interesting. We have Darlene Graham looking really like she's been through the ringer in these 10 days since she's taken this Senate seat, pushing for her to basically be able to keep it. And yet in these 10 days, it looks like a lot's gone down because of how she seems to, her energy. So we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to start with a couple other things. Of course, we have Fauci coming up tomorrow. You know, Fauci for prison, I like to call it, this hearing with Rand Paul at the helm at the, as he's chair of the Senate Committee on Department of Homeland Security and government, blah, blah, blah. And so what we're going to be seeing there, of course, the diaries are released. They're all across the news. Very interesting as the Mamdani election, theft and crimes are coming out. And that is realamerica.vote. If you haven't checked that out, I'll link it again tonight, where they're putting up all of the stats with everything they're finding about the at least 23% of bogus votes in New York City for the what just happened with both Mamdani's vote and then the primaries, all of it. And it's interesting with Fauci's diary, where we're seeing his nighttime chats with Cuomo, right? And everything that Cuomo did with his crimes. And of course, during the COVID, and that we remember, the dead people, the hospital ships, just the horribleness that is Cuomo for his COVID-related crimes. And then we also see that Cuomo was running for mayor, right? I believe, whenever they run, it's because they have something to hide. That's the insanity of what is our modern government and Congress and all these people and officials in official seats, where they run to protect themselves, okay? And so, interesting. We'll see how it plays out tomorrow. It's going to be epic, hopefully, because it's getting a little too much coverage, right? That oftentimes that is a ruse to cover up for the other things that are going on. And also we had Sam Faddis, the indefatigable former CIA massive agent operative, especially in Iran and the Middle East, who just passed away this weekend. He would appear on the War Room a lot with Bannon. And he also fought huge against the 2020 election steal and also everything to do with the COVID V. And it ends up that what ends up getting him is the bioweapon, okay, that had an accelerated attack on him. And then he passed away this last weekend. An incredible person. He is asking, his family is asking for donations to something called campfreedompa.org, campfreedompa.org, but also to the Chestnut Foundation to reestablish the incredible chestnut trees of that East Coast that were just so amazing, these majestic, incredible chestnut forest with these incredible trees. So there's that with Sam Faddis. We pray for him. We know that he is in a great place now in his eternal life, and we want to thank him for all the incredible work he did throughout his life. He exposed the CIA. He said it's totally unsalvageable as it exists now. Wrote many books on this subject, etc. I'll try to link those books below where you can find it. It's basically And Magazine, AND caps, and then magazine.com where you find his work. And of course, we had yesterday as well, Trump at Michigan, where he did this, great speech for the most part, all about the auto industry and bringing it back. And he implored Americans, again, to call Thune and to call their senators to basically, again, he wants to get rid of the filibuster to pass the Save America Act, as well as multiple other things, but the Save America Act being huge. And so that's 202-224-3121 for your senator, and 202-224-2321 for Thune. And he specifically called out John Thune as the leader, saying, call him. And so that's what we should be doing, okay, along with the billblasterapp.org. You can go and do the socials as well. That's really important. Thune is, he gave a eulogy today at the Senate Rotunda for Graham, almost cried at the end. He was just so sad and, calling on God's salvation and eternal life and all of these things. Very interesting, but I personally would like Mike Lee to be the new leader. It's only 27 votes to get Thune out. And Lee is leading the charge to not have the Senate recess. He's demanding no recess, which they never take anyway. They never actually gavel out for an actual recess where Trump could get his recess appointments put in there for temporary appointments to get things done. And what did Thune say on Hannity last night? He said, when Hannity said, well, what are you going to get done before the recess, never mentioning the SAVE Act, Thune said, well, of course, for the dead Lindsey Graham, we're going to get the Russia sanctions bill through. The Russia sanctions bill, right? And so much is coming out here, and it's going to be my main point before I get into Trump's speech today at the funeral, and so much more to do with Iraq and Ukraine and Netanyahu. And as Netanyahu and Zelensky both met, were I believe summoned. I don't think this was a Netanyahu's been trying to get in with the president ever since the beginning of this recent stage of the Iran conflict, the takedown of City of London operations, Netanyahu and Israel's Mossad control of so much of what goes on in the Middle East when it comes to the deism that's needed by the City of London. I'll bring this up again before I move forward. On Maria Bartiromo on Sunday morning, she interviewed Netanyahu, and he was, after laughing and grinning all about Lindsey Graham's death, suddenly, we have, of course, this him saying, very clearly saying, if Iran does anything, we're going to do something huge if they hit us. And interestingly, Iran's not hitting Israel, okay? And we know the Al-Aqsa Mosque raid, all of it. What many people are saying, there is planted devices already at the mosque waiting for this FF event trigger point to happen. But we also have him saying, we have, Israel has many allies, right now, huge, wanting to get with us. They want to get with us for our technology and our intelligence, right? And basically he names, he's like, many in Asia. We have many in South America, right? This is Argentina and the whole Malay situation, the coming possible attempt to take the Falkland Islands, all of this stuff of Israel, north, south, east, west, right? And he said, also, we have them in Europe. We have them in Europe, right? And that is their coalition of the willing that gets into the Ukraine paramilitary forces that got all of our taxpayer dollars during everything 2014 forward, and Lindsey Graham's involvement in all of it when it comes to Ukrainian stealing of all our money, the weapons going, we don't know where, but we do know that it has a lot to do with, maybe the two, ASAS SINAATION attempts on Trump, okay, whether it's Butler or Root, Ryan Ruth, etc. But way beyond that, okay. We look at what happened with Graham, right? With right after the NATO summit, big stuff going down, sea changes happening. Graham runs to Ukraine, right? And then the rest is history, so to speak. But we're going to talk about that more here in a moment. So Netanyahu very, very outspokenly saying how much Europe, Asia, and South America wants their intelligence and technology. That's exactly what would be fused, okay, with Section 219, another reason to call the senators to not pass the NDAA with Section 219 in it, okay, the fusion of the military of the U.S. with a whole new executive position at the Pentagon to actively seek out more and more industries where Israel will be fused into our military apparatus and production and research and development, IARPA, DARPA, everything. The technology involved quantum, bioengineering, biowarfare. All of this is included, okay? And the SIAA, Section 1217, that is the fusion of the Senate Intelligence Authorization Act, which would infuse our intelligence directly with Israel. And Netanyahu openly saying everybody wants our intelligence, right? And with Zelensky today, with Trump, basically, we're there to get those licenses for those Patriot missiles we want to co-produce in Ukraine. And so I believe that there was quite likely a strong drawing down of these two by President Trump today. And as we saw at the funeral, they had third row tier. They weren't invited to the first row, right, at the funeral. They were in the third. We had Zelensky behind Mark Wayne Mullen, who's a great friend, right, of them both. But they're in the third row, right, at the funeral today. But before we get to the funeral and some really interesting stuff that came out of it, we get, and the other thing that John Thune absolutely needs to do with the Russia sanctions bill of Graham is also to get Clayton in as the new ODNI, right? Because Bill Pulte is now on the fifth round of layoffs at DNI. It just keeps happening and happening. He's firing all the deep staters out of the positions where they're able to coordinate all the intelligence to use against the administration and all of us. And so Thune's other big thing they got to do before their 5-week vacation paid for by us is to get Clayton in, to get Pulte out of the office as the Director of National Intelligence temporarily. And what Pulte did today was remove James Clapper's name from the wall at the ODNI. And that's a huge signal, right, when it comes to the 2020 election. Still, actually, way before that with Russiagate primarily, actually. This is way more about Russia collusion, the impeachments of Trump, the everybody against Trump of the Comey, Brennan years, as the continuing ongoing grand jury cases are going on in Florida with Judge Cannon, and this has to do with Brennan. And Clapper's right up in there, so hopefully he's getting rolled up on that. So let's get in there about this point to do with Iraq, interestingly enough. Okay, this has to do with the second front. And we know that Trump had the prime minister of Iraq recently at the White House, very close ties going on there, where Trump is nourishing this this new economic bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Iraq after all this horror show of the last 25 years. And so what's happening is Trump and the prime minister they've, Trump has said, we're going to take our troops out of Iraq. We're going to bring that down, and we're going to have economic relationships instead of this, this persuasion and domineering effect over Iraq. And it's been huge, right? And then what do we get? Like a week later, we get the attack on a U.S. base, right, in northern Iraq. Very, very interesting. Where we're also having the attacks in Jordan. We have people that are dying. U.S. soldiers are dying. And it's very interesting what happened here is we get coming out that the National Security Advisor of Iraq has identified that the Ukraine paramilitary groups are doing all kinds of attacks based out of Iraq, whether it's the AES, another, ISIS, another ISIL, another one of these. How much did Graham know about that, we wonder? And so what we get here is that the National Security Advisor coming out and saying, after interrogation, we know, and his name is Qasim al-Aboudi, we know that this is Ukraine operatives and paramilitary inside Iraq that is doing things like launching drones, missile-capable drones over Saudi Arabia, right? Because there's been this whole push with Israel, Saudi Arabia, the whole situation with Trump, with this nuclear agreement that seemed to have just gone through. But what we have here is these attacks where this thing known as the Second Front out of Ukraine, where they are trying to expand the war for and with Israel and the EU, cabal, European International, to try to interconnect, okay, the Iran and Russia wars to create this World War III front. And so this is very huge when we see that now it's been identified that there is a paramilitary groups out of Ukraine that are 100% in Iraq, creating these proxy assaults. And I think that's pretty massive news. And so when we go from there and we go back to the situation of the funeral today and before that, the ceremony at the Senate Rotunda, it's very interesting to look at it all. And we've seen through like QComs and this kind of thing where they said if there's a wrinkled flag, we will know it was an adversary that took out Graham. And there was a wrinkled flag on the coffin of Lindsey Graham today at the Rotunda, and that's very interesting to note. It was a wrinkled flag, and it was very interesting also to have this meeting of Zelensky and Netanyahu happen basically during that Senate hearing. That Senate Graham celebration, where we basically, you have J.D. Vance, he's saying he loved Lindsey Graham, everybody loves him. And then they had the procession around the coffin where many, many people would not touch the coffin. Everybody's walking, touching the coffin, right? You had McCarthy, former Speaker McCarthy, wouldn't touch the coffin. Chuck Schumer wouldn't touch the coffin. Adam Schiff wouldn't touch the coffin. I don't know if there's religious things with being Jewish with touching Christian coffins. I don't know about that. But very interesting, the whole scenario there, and the pretty milquetoast. Actually, it wasn't. In lots of ways, there was just a lot of veiled insults meant to be loving, disguised as love during this, scenario there at the situation, but at the Senate. But what we've got here is, we then go to 2:00 and we get the Eastern Time National Cathedral situation with Trump giving, of course, the kind of primary speech there, eulogy. And it is so interesting what happens here. Not just the lineup, the front row ends up being, what do we get? We get Trump and then Vance everybody looking very serious. You know, then we get Besant next to Vance, who looks the most calm and collected. And then we get Eric Trump, interestingly. And then we get his wife. And then we get Steve Witkoff. And then we get Susie Wiles. And that's like the front row there, which is interesting. And then, of course, like I said, you get Netanyahu and Zelensky in the third row behind other cabinet members. And and then second after Trump is Hannity, who kind of just covers up everything that Trump says. But what's interesting here in Trump's speech is that he kind of does like a huge giant like Q message thing. I mean, it was very interesting because he basically talks about, he makes, you know, in his speech, whoever wrote it, I think it's Steve Miller, but you know, this is all about focusing on Lindsey Graham's cell phone, right? And we know the ability of what Mossad can do with cell phones, and we know that they know that Graham, you know, brought his cell phone into the Skyfall drone factory in Ukraine, in Kiev, right? That blows up. But this interesting thing of Trump basically describing him as a 33-year Air Force veteran. He basically says, you know, he never saw a war he didn't like. And he goes into this huge reference about making a joke about Graham joking about Gitmo, and this thing about torture at Gitmo. Very, very interesting, okay? And then he basically refers back to 10 years ago and how he had given out Graham's phone number, and that what happens is that, you know, he says, I blew up his phone. I mean, this is what Trump says. He said, you know, his phone was blown up. And he says, you know, and he says his number again. He recites Lindsey Graham's phone number. And then he says, you know, give it a shot. All this very interesting referencing that's very bizarre for a eulogy speech. No place. All the things he could have said. Very, very interesting, as Netanyahu and Zelensky are both there. And, you know, this is all happening within this context of, you know, that Graham died 2 days after that NATO summit where the Air Force One threat on Trump, another assassination attempt on Trump with Air Force One, and the circling of Antwerp, right, in Belgium, and then Graham just runs off to Ukraine, doesn't come back on the flight, runs off to Ukraine. He's in Kiev. He goes to the Skyfall, brings his phone in there, and then, you know, and then he's dead, right? And then he's dead, and it's blown up, and the apartment complex is blown up, etc. So very, very interesting to look at those, and I'm just going to leave it at that with you. You know, we have with Netanyahu and Zelensky coming in through the side door, no fanfare, basically summoned. And we have this new discovery, totally public, coming out public, about the Iraq, Ukrainian military, paramilitary in Iraq, all the FFs, blowing up things, harming American interests, Trump's negotiations with Saudi Arabia, all of it. And of course, we know about the Houthis, you know, being, you know, squirreled up by Netanyahu's team, and his position of Israel at Somaliland, you know, across the straits of Bab el-Mandab, or whatever it's called, those straits with the Red Sea, and the access for Saudi Arabia, just choking out more of the shipping out of the Middle East. And so, you know, we have to look at all of this, you know, as being interconnected, as Trump has now, this is day 4 or 5 of no action against Iran, and a pause here. And so I wanted to just point out all of that to you, because I think it's all very importantly linked. And so, you know, going on from there, and as we look at other things happening here, this is the election year for Netanyahu. He needs the war to keep going. This is the destruction of the Likud party sort of is in the mix here, as of course we have Naftali Bennett, going full bore against Netanyahu and Israel, and there is a sea change happening, right? A major sea change happening. I wonder if I can go back to something from yesterday that I wanted to cover, which is the ex-chief of Shin Bet, Admiral Ayalon. He was on the Going Underground podcast, and he lives in Haifa now. He's in Israel, but he basically was describing how Israel always refuses to accept victory when it has to do with anything to do with Arab nations, and especially the two state peace process. And he is very horrified about what happened with Gaza and what continues to happen in the West Bank. And he basically said, we watched, why did Arafat, why was there the walk away way back when with the two-state solution that would have been absolute peace for the people of Israel, absolute peace for all of us. And he basically said it's a clear fact. Everybody in Israel knows it 100%. It's not a myth. He said that it is absolutely clear that Netanyahu and his government funded Hamas, basically created them, funded them to go against have there being a civilian Palestinian movement, and that you have to basically know your enemy if you're going to win. And he's seeing out there that that it is the failure of the USA and other places to fully identify who the enemy is. I think that's a big wink, wink, right? And so very interesting there. I'll see if I can link that podcast below because it is pretty intense, because we know at this point we have $7 billion being put out by Israel just this year for foreign influence. It kind of, even puts shade on China, right, and their money for foreign influence and everything. But, election steals everything. But, but looking at the election steal situation, we have Kash Patel, of course, going to China. He went to Russia. He went to, this is everything to do with the election espionage cases, foreign espionage election crimes cases that are going on down in Florida and also in New York. We need Jim McDonald confirmed as a U.S. Attorney for New York. That's obviously not huge on Thune's list. Okay, we need whip votes. We want votes. We want whip votes to show who supports, getting rid of the filibuster, who supports, not, abolishing the recess for this August, who supports the SAVE Act. People need to know who these criminals are, defying the will of 85% of the American people. Okay, the whip votes need to come. They need to happen, right? And so, but as we look at this, we've got Jeanine Pirro now, U.S. Attorney, going off to the Philippines, right? And we had the ASEAN conference with Marco Rubio attending as Secretary of State, the ASEAN, alliance there in Asia. And there's huge stuff going on here with the CCP's involvement and election crimes and stealing in the Philippines of last year. And in Manila is the headquarters for the CIA in Asia, right? And there's just all this interconnected stuff going on behind the scenes with these espionage election crime cases that will lend huge credence to who they can capture from abroad or get into cooperation, right? Patel, China, Russia, where they can get people in cooperation, as we're having CIA whistleblowers also coming in on board as well, is more and more honing in on more proof and evidence against the deep state players and also, of course, the machine apparatus. We had Patrick Byrne do a great shell game show last week where he's saying there was a second server next to like the DOM server and other servers in the election machines where there would be a second server that was still connected to the WIN system, the WIN system, and the EDS system. And the election would happen on this server, then it would be run through this other server, and then it would go to the actual election official receiver, okay, that it wasn't actually sent until it was run through second server. So very interesting as we're watching all of this go on, and I wanted to make you abreast of it. And then going from there, I just want to talk about real quick in the UK. I talked about last week with the DSRB, the Defense Security Resilience Bank, that that Mark Carney is launching out of all these countries that will fund that massive paramilitary groups out of Ukraine, but basically also that we're seeing, it's headquartered in Turkey and Ankara, but it will go through all of the other, Latvia, et cetera, countries, Belgium, and all these countries that sort of form a wall around Russia and Ukraine. And this is all about milking the people of Europe and these countries for everything they can, except Turkey, of course, because Erdogan's not going to do it, right? But basically bilking and stealing and sucking as much that's left, especially out of Canada, of the taxpayer dollars into this Defense Security Resilience Bank. Mark Carney, former, of course, head of the Bank of England, and him working directly with Andy Burnham. So we have this whole thing where, Trump fired Keir Starmer, this was all clear before NATO summit. And then we get Andy Burnham in a few days later, basically. And then, about 10 days before he's actually, officially the prime minister again in labor. And he starts doing all kinds of strange things, with, we're going to drill, we're going to go up to the North Sea, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. He starts doing all this anti-labor, labor in name only, lino stuff, and he's now come out, Andy Burnham, and and he needs the money, right? If he's working with Carney for this bank, they need tons of cash, right? And they give so much welfare out of the UK that they're basically insolvent practically at this point. And so we have Burnham coming out and saying, we're going to cut welfare payouts by a third. And they have like $1 trillion in welfare payouts, right? We probably put it to shame here in the US, but $1 trillion. So he wants 333 billion to go into defense buildup. Think Carney's bank, right? So it's all very interesting here with the coalition of the willing of the European Trotskyite cartel globalist cabal, and what Trump's doing here, and the quietness of Russia and China, at this time while this fight is going on. And so Andy Burnham basically is saying, if you want welfare, you're going to, and it's squirrely, like, is this going to include the migrants? Will it not include the invaders? Is it just for the citizens? That would make sense, right? Basically, but that you're going to have to do job training or volunteer work if you want your welfare payouts. And this is huge. Like the dole is like huge. The dole, that's just like a thing. You're in the UK, get on the dole. That's it. This is huge to go against this. And he also, very interestingly, did also halt the early release plan for massive amounts of criminals, okay, including violent criminals in the UK, where they were just going to release them and basically say, we don't want to pay for the prisons, we're just going to let you all out. And he halted that. So it's an interesting combo. We'll keep watching where this is going with Burnham. So moving on from there, I want to talk about just for a second this awfulness of what's going on in France, right, with the burning down of Bordeaux. Awful. One of the kind of, maybe most preserved areas, right, of France and Bordeaux, with the huge national forest, and they're burning down the forest, and they're burning down the towns, right? I can't remember the names of them. Let me see if I can find them. But when we're looking at this and we're seeing the burning down of France, it's quite horrible. You know, it's the same exact thing as Palisades or La Hyena or whatever. It's you know, same everywhere. Palisades, you know, California, Paradise, California. The homes burn, the trees don't. Right, in the forest, the trees burn. In the neighborhoods, they burn down the homes, the trees don't burn. Right, it's the same EMF controlled burn. Right, in the houses, it's the it is the ionization. They're doing massive, massive microwaving across the U.S. as well right now. Huge onslaught across the United States, just ramping up like we are literally sitting in a microwave oven. But there in Bordeaux, now it's getting to the point where these fires, these raging walls of fire, are now threatening, supposedly, the French missile facilities where they create their missiles, where they manufacture them, as well as their massive rocket facilities, apparently factories there as well. So massive operation going on here in France to burn down areas of Bordeaux, which I'm sure are very ancient, or shall we say, you know, after World War II, built up to be as they are today, and now being, of course, I'm sure, a pay for play on the taking over of those properties and land. So hundreds of thousands of people displaced, and it's quite horrible. We also had a huge earthquake in Japan last night, huge, like 6.9. Lots of people perishing in that. Buildings collapsing as well in the southern tip of Japan. So that's pretty awful. And just winding down here, yeah, I'll cover more on that tomorrow. But just winding down here, we also have this situation of, just on an aside at the end of this kind of concise video tonight, is we have Governor Beshear out of Kentucky now demanding, you know, not just a proof of life photo from Mitch McConnell in his supposedly still alive in the hospital. He's basically saying, we want a verbal address from you to the people of Kentucky or else resign. And so that's, of course, because we have like 6 days until it would be impossible to have a runoff, you know, emergency Senate election in Kentucky. And basically, that's what they're trying to resist at all costs, because, of course, the threat of Thomas Massie gaining that Senate seat. And so that's what's going on. Beshear demands verbal connection with the turtle. So we'll see what goes down there. So I think I'm going to leave it there, you know, for now. I'll be back tomorrow with more digging in. We're going to have the Fauci stuff, but so much more of this Netanyahu visit. You know, the Zelensky come out and claiming we're getting the licenses for the Patriot missile defense systems, and you know, the ongoing horror show threat of Section 219 of the NDAA and the SIAA Section 1712, I believe, or 1217. So yeah, it is, you know, do what Trump asked. Call your senator, call Thune, 202-224-3121. Your senator, 204-221, excuse me, 202, what did I say? 202-224-2321 for Thune directly. Trump has asked that you blow up his phone, so to speak, and so go ahead and do it. It takes 2 minutes, and you just say, hey, we want some whip votes. We want to see who's voting for what. We need to know what our representatives are doing, our senators, and we want no recess until you pass the Save America Act, as well as so many other things. So I'm going to leave it there for tonight. If you found something that was new or interesting analysis or information and you want to support the channel, so appreciated, and there's ways to do so below. Would really love it, as well as the liking and sharing and trying to break through the algorithm. And then I will mention my fantastic sponsor, that is c60evo.com, c60evo.com/YAFTV. This is the incredible ESS60 molecule, the same formulation with the same purity that's used in all of the studies, including there is an incredible study that came out recently that basically shows how cancer, when it encounters the ESS16 molecule, it basically, the cells die off, okay? This is incredible against radiation. So if you have those kind of treatments, or you're dealing with radiation in so many levels in our lives right now, basically it protects the healthy cells and it helps the sick cells to die off. And that's why it's being brought up in the caseload by those clinics that do both, that work with allopathic and natural medicine. And it's just great for your central nervous system. It goes and cleans out your neurons, helps to protect the nerves. It is also just great for energy, focus, mood, and it's just a supercharged mitochondrial cleaner. It gets into your mitochondria, it works with your master hormones, and it flushes out the garbage from your cells. And all degenerative diseases, of course, come from cellular dysfunction. And that's why the new biowarfare is just aimed directly at your cells and DNA, your mitochondria. And of course, since the jabs, those are the diseases that just are going on turbo steroids. So I can't recommend it enough. I love it. This is the olive oil, the most potent. This is the MCT oil that is that people love for workouts before and after for recovery, anti-inflammation. They're both are, but there's something about this for people doing the MCT oil regimens that just love this. We're talking about super athletes that do massive triathlons, swear by it. So check it out, even just for your basic aches and pains. Incredible now studies coming out to do with migraines, etc. So you get 10% off if you're just a viewer. C60evo.com right there in the banner, /YAFTV. You do need to use that landing page to get the 10% off, which is the code YAFTV. And then people who support the channel get 15% off with a different link and code sent to you. And it's coming up on the end of the month. And every month, I'm able to give away 2 bottles of what are the capsules. That is the C60 Evo olive oil in the capsules. And I'm able to give 2 of those away every month to people who support the channel that are randomly selected. And that's a fantastic thing by my sponsor. So thanks so much for letting me plug. It's huge times what's going on here. This is just such a massive geopolitical fight. And as it's happening, we're just praying behind the scenes for all the election crime stuff. And that the international aspect here is huge, and what's going on behind the scenes of these international espionage crime cases, okay, are, I believe, going to give over a lot of information to do with the taking out and down of the internal U.S. players, because our greatest, besides maybe Israel and China, threat, and Europe, is this situation of, obviously, the calls coming from inside the house. We have a massive cabal trying to destroy America for their overlords of cartel Babylon. So nothing you don't already know. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with the news. You are free.